So my pronouns are they and them and her. I'm a transgender person of First Nation heritage. Um, I worked in welfare for 25 years as a social worker for Centrelink, Department of Human Services, Child Protection. So my focus in my early years was looking at welfare provision for young people and people living with disabilities. I was very passionate about that. But my always initial goal was to be a teacher, and I really wanted that passion. So later in my life, I decided to go back to school, retrained. I retrained as a primary and high school teacher. Loved teaching, started teaching, but that's when my identity kind of started to kind of question a bit, and I realized I was a transgender person. Found that after I began transitioning, schools just stopped hiring me, and it was told to me by a number of schools, and I applied for over 40 jobs that it was unsafe for me to be in their school. And unfortunately, all they would say you're not suitable. So I just want to give you that scope as to where I am and why I've taken on this research. I'm involved in many things. On the first inaugural Rainbow Committee for the City of Yarra. We're looking at social inclusive community building and looking at schools and education to make them more inclusive. Very excited about that. I'm on a few boards. Love my work with TASA. That's my number one thing that's really resonates with my heart. So I just wanted to share that. I don't know what more to say. I don't want to big note myself because I don't want to do. I'm not that type of person. I've came to this research field a bit later in my life. I did a Masters of Education at University of Melbourne last year, which I specialised in diversity and social change. This is where my research developed in my last semester, and I'm now taking it to the research phase, and then following June will be the doctorate phase. So thank you and welcome. That is me. As Sally's getting it. So yeah, as I said, thank you so much. So the journey began as a result of me not being able to work in schools. And I thought, well, what am I going to do with my life? What is wrong? And I realized that obviously, it's to do with the whole heteronormative spaces that schools are kind of invested in and still perpetuate. So I thought, well, what am I going to do? How can I somehow, I guess, disrupt this kind of space to allow people like myself to be able to work in a school? Because all the research around has sort of centered and said that the students who are gender non-conforming and trans are more likely to experience greater risks of suicide, self-harm, lower levels of attendance, and more likely to change from school. So yeah, so okay, great. Sally can now share. Can you please begin the journey, Sally? Lovely. Oh, well, I'm hearing lovely messages from the thing. So look, I'm a strong advocate in this space, and that's why I'm happy to share my phone numbers and my
You can
contact.
watch this if you want.
Oh, lovely. Can everyone see this? Or wave your heads or show. Oh, beautiful, Mari. Thank you. Okay, so what I've done is just to start us off with the first slide. So I just said, this is where I came up with. Do secondary school teachers disrupt heteronormative practices within their classrooms? And that's my beginning journey. I thought, well, what's going on? Because we've got LGBTIQ policies embedded in the current inclusiveness policies in Victoria schools, but what is it? And the question that kept staying in my mind was, do you see me as your colleague, or am I a disruption in your school? And that's the message I was explicitly getting from principals and leadership, because they saw me as a disruption. So it's kind of like mirroring that. So I thought, well, hang on a minute, how will I can disrupt this heteronormative practice in schools? And it's like the picture there, you've got to try and put everyone through have to be a certain way to present themselves in school. So my next slide, if Sally, can you just bring on the next slide. Beautiful. So my journey. And one of the quotes that really inspired me was Yondell. And she said, languages shape our understanding of how marginalization happens and positions in systems of exclusion. And language is a reality constituting practice. That quote hit me like a light bulb because I thought, yes, it's the language and it's the power of the language. And the question through her work that I really began to explore my research is whose voices are represented. So in order to take on this research, I did a systematic literature research. I wanted to see what is out there at the moment because I know there are gaps. I've experienced the gaps, but I wanted to see what is written in Australia and particularly Canada and the US and the UK and in other Eastern third world country spaces, because I wanted to see what's happening. Is there still invisibility? So through my, and I'll go into that shortly, through my systematic literature research, I found a certain number of exciting things, which I'm going to share shortly. But what I've done this year to expand my research has been now is I am having focus groups. So I've developed 4 focus groups, and these focus groups are two cohorts. 2 cohorts are pre-service teachers and accomplished teachers. And my specification is going to be around cisgendered heterosexual teachers, because what I found in the research is that if I was to just have people like myself or students like myself, then I'm only going to capture a certain population, people who already agree with me, or people who find me abhorrent in what I'm trying to do. So what I wanted to do was, how do I capture the majority, well, the other group of heteronormative heterosexual, heteronormative kind of linked together, those sort of principals and leadership team, so that I can see what's going on, what are they thinking about, how do they interpret curriculum, how do they have their lessons delivered in a classroom space, and are they aware of it? So through the power of focus groups, what we're going to be doing is capturing their dialogues, recording their dialogues with certain caption cards that are going to be presented to them. And this is taking place this year in October and November. Fingers crossed with COVID that it won't be a lockdown, otherwise it'll be on Zoom. But I really want the face-to-face observations through the cards, because it's about capturing what they think about certain parts of the curriculum, how they see the current system. And I wanted to see between the 2 cohorts whether students, pre-service students, are more accepting of diversity, are more willing to look at bits of curriculum more constructively and see the gender bias that is presented in documents, and to see whether there is a distinction between that cohort and a group of accomplished teachers, to see whether there is any difference or a similarity, and to see what we can come up with through that. And then with that, I then will shape it with my current systematic literature research, hopefully capturing data, metadata, that will tell me some of the language, some of the ideas and values that have come on from that focus group, to then shape and develop a package of training that can be used in schools to then hopefully at least make teachers more aware and critically aware of the material that they're presenting and the impact that it will have on their students who are trans and gender questioning. So my next slide, Sally, I've just done a couple of operational definitions, and I might just quickly explain, because maybe some of you have not heard the term of cisgendered. And what cisgendered is, it's that you identify with the gender that you were born with. So you might have students who are gay, lesbian, bisexual, intersex, who don't have a disparity between their gender. But so that's why it gets a bit complex. But my area is looking at people like myself who do not identify with the gender that they were born or assigned, I should say, at birth. So I put these these terms in there to kind of give you a kind of a shaping of some of the core areas that I'm looking at the research to do that. So if we have the next slide, please, Sally. Okay, so the rationale of my research. So there was 4 key components of my research. One was that I read there was a shift in Western society, as in the last couple of years we've seen that the uh, Charter of Human Rights has recognised that trans people need to have safe spaces, and to recognize that we need to make sure that the law protects people who identify as transgender. And this has had a sort of like effect where other laws have then been modified to reflect that particular change in values. And it's been sort of, I'd say, filtered through the school systems, but much of it is still, I call it filtering, like little rainbow drops, because it has gone through, but in practice, there is still major kind of discrepancies in the way students feel in schools and the way their interaction with their other peers. So after 2010, we had the Safe Schools Coalition that was formed and quite sort of spirited to provide advocacy and changing some of the ideas around uh, LGBTIQ representation in students. And Minus 18, which is a wonderful organization made up of parents and young people under the age of, I think it's now 21, who identify within the spectrum of GLBTIQ, are able to then come and get support. So one of the things I noticed just in that sort of area was that as a trans person, we are grouped in with the whole cluster of GLBTIQ. And yes, it's good in terms of recognition, but the complexity of that is that the issues that are confronted by someone who's trans or gender non-conforming are quite different for someone who identifies as gay or lesbian or bisexual and is cisgendered, because the aspect of being cisgendered allows you to fit in more to the binary mode of representation in schools. And we know that in the early years of high school, especially, students seek to form or have relationships with like-minded students. So this is why I thought, this is the area I need to really be examining. So primary schools are different because there's more acceptance and programs have been delivered in such a way that it's more acceptable for diversity to be expressed. And we've seen that in, you would have noticed in Australia, we have drag queens reading story time to increase literacy. So this is sort of being sort of in some ways more, I guess, tolerated and allowed to kind of infiltrate into the community in different settings. So I thought, well, hang on a minute. There is, there's that, but what happens in the first 3 years of high school when peer formation, peer identity is one of the most important things for young people. And this is where the research gap starts, where we're finding that young people who identify are coming to be an awareness of something different about themselves are struggling because they're being isolated. So another big achievement was the same-sex marriage. When we had this that came through, and I was teaching at that stage, I think it was VCE English, and one of the tasks in that was to talk about the same-sex marriage, was fantastic because it opened up the dialogue for students to kind of say, oh, okay, this is what I think, this is what I feel, and I had to put rationales, and some of us were able to explore that with students to allow them to think deeper about what it means to be in a same-sex relationship. How different is it really from two people who are heterosexual? So it opened up that discourse for a better understanding in that higher level. However, in the younger years, in the early secondary years, there was still a lot of teachers were avoiding that particular topic within English because they didn't feel comfortable with it. And it's always this thing, this preconception, oh, if we talk about it, it'll just make it worse for the kids who obviously in the classroom may be coming to terms with their identity. And this is another area that I need to kind of disrupt and explore. So obviously there was some key points about what the empirical research, and it came a lot from the student well-being surveys that were being undertaken in schools about how they feel about school, their development with their peers, and their identity. And it was through those sort of well-being surveys that we begin to see a trend developing. And as the surveys that allowed students to express their gender and sexual identities, that's when we started to see, okay, there's a problem. There is a problem. How do we address it? So obviously I looked at, do I go with the research? Is it just, and I wasn't sure at first what approach to take, but one of my supervisors said, Dr. Vickers said to me, why don't you explore it from a more community development advocate sort of perspective that I grew up with in the 80s, where let's confront, let's disrupt, let's find out what the others think about us in order to then see what mindset they're at and then develop an allyship. So all of my research is sort of lending to that fact we need to develop allyships. We don't want to be the enemy. We want to be friends. We want to go on this journey together. So the process of the participation research, I wanted to take it more than tolerance and to investigate and challenge heteronormative practices in high schools settings, because I really wanted to change that narrative of tolerating difference to thinking, wow, we're just all the same, we're just on the spectrum of diversity. And that takes a bit of work to get through because it's something that's been ingrained in people's thinking for so many years. So I'll just quickly go to the next slide. Oh, I am focused only on state schools because I don't have access to private schools. And this is something that I found in the research gaps, is that there is a lot of material in high schools because it's easier to get permission from authorities. Private schools are not willing to go into those spaces and want to investigate this. And that's an excellent question, and that is reflected in my early findings. And this is one of the areas that we need to work with further, because it's within the private school settings that teachers can make the most influence, because privilege, as we know, has certain access levels that other kids in public schools may not have. And it's really interesting coming from Melbourne University, speaking to teachers, that there is this underlying thing that, oh yes, we accept everyone, we help the one person, but it's almost tokenistic in that, yes, we will help people, we will try and help this student fit into the classroom, but it just stays within that student. And it still is the other. It's not about, let's change the whole school. Let's change the whole way we look at, bits of documents as they come through the classroom. So this is the kind of dilemma that I'm coming across. And it's hard because at one level, I want to build allyship, but on the next level, I have to disrupt some of their thinking. And this is complex. So again, going back to the justification of why this research, why do we take that? When again, I look at the whole cohort of LGBTIQ, and this is coming from the Mental Health by Rosen Trick in 2013, 61% experience of young people reported experience verbal homophobic abuse. 18% reported physical homophobic abuse. 69% reported other types of discrimination, including exclusion and rumors. And I think a lot of this is also underreported, because this captured students from, I think it was 16 to 21. We don't have data before 16, and this is the complexity, because the students in year 7, 8 and 9, where peer formation, rediscovering of one's sexuality, maybe affirming one's gender, starts to kind of blossom. It starts to kind of develop as interaction between the self and the others around them starts to interplay into their development. So we need to capture what's happening, because there is still a lot of discrimination. You might say, well, how do you know this? Well, I can only go through anecdotal evidence, talking to counselors, psychologists, Headspace, that have this data and are working with this. But because of, we're talking about confidentiality, we're also talking about, the issues of parents, and coming out is very complex when it comes to trans students. So I'll just go to the next slide, please, Sally, and that is the mental health. So one of the key components of, why do this research is mental health. Mental health, the number of young people who are trans or gender questioning or gender non-conforming are accessing services at an alarming rate, and a lot of them are self-harming, because when one affirms their gender, it's not just a matter of the self, it's also the main other players in your life at that stage, which is your family or your caregivers. And it's difficult when you're living in an environment that's predominantly cisgendered, and you are not cisgendered, and all around you, you have imagery, you have news, you have all sorts of things affirming cisgendered lives or heterosexual cisgendered lives. How do you come with that? How do you start to, where does your place in the world sit? So obviously there is a lot of confusion, there's a lot of isolation, there's a lot of marginalization that starts to occur. And before I move on to the literature review, I just want to mention one point that highlight, and it talks again from my own lived experience and some of the students that I've worked with personally under 16. A lot of these students that I spoke to, 30. So you're right, that's a small sample, it's not representative. Out of that 30, 29 have never been invited to a party of their peers. And I asked them about it, how they felt about that. And a lot of them stated that, well, the parents don't have said that when the friend has mentioned, can my friend, will mention a name, say Ricky, wanted to come. They said, no, we don't want, no. And also the parents didn't want them to be close friends with them. So they're learning at a very early age that not only are they not wanted, in social interactions within a cisgendered community, they're not even wanted to be friends with. So already that stigma and marginalization is taking place. And this is an area that really breaks my heart, because we don't see this in the research. We don't have these lived experiences of young people saying, and it breaks my heart that what I went through in the 80s is still happening in 2021, where birthdays and parties and socials are still areas that need to be addressed. They are still areas, unfortunately, that young people who are trans and gender diverse experience isolation and invisibility and rejection. So it's really difficult. And that's why I guess part of that journey of mental health is it sometimes when we look at studies, we don't see that. If you could put the next slide, please, Sally. I hope I'm not talking. I want to leave some time for question time, so I'll be quick. I'm sorry if I'm going on. I just get so passionate about this. How did I frame all this, and how am I framing my book? Well, I'm looking at The Three Dilemmas for Identity by Gurwitz and Cribb, because that has really shaped my understanding and framed my own practice. I look at every aspect of research that has been undertaken, and I ask myself three core questions. And one, are they engaging with the full complexities of identities, or are they just categorizing them? There's one thing to present research and say, this is what's happening, this is how many XY, this, but if that's all they're doing, all it's doing is just highlighting something, but it's not explaining what's behind those figures, what's behind what does trans, what does gender non-conforming look like, because it's just a word on a bit of paper. You have to go deeper. You have to explore the complexity of, as I was mentioning, the relationship with the parents, the relationship with the peers, the early years of sexual identity, developing how they fit. So this is an important one. The second one is, and I guess this is where my focus groups will fall into, is recognizing the identities, which we see a lot of in research papers. But more and more now, we want to see problematizing them, which I have seen, and disrupting them. Haven't really much seen that. And that's the complexity, as we all know, because school institutions, especially secondary schools institutions, are predominantly, well, they're heterosexual institutions based on, we're going back, to colonial times, we're going back to UK models, we're going back to being white male privileged that set up these institutions, and it's very hard to change something that's occurred for so many years. So that is how I've formed my body of my research around these three core tenets, and this is what I use to do a lot of my other areas of work. So I'll just go quickly to the next slide, just to inform everyone. My methodology. So what I did was I collected qualitative data through a systematic literature review, exploring the general landscape of gender identity and schooling, obviously through a social constructive lens. And then I just used some of the key terms I used. This was part of a paper that I presented at Melbourne University, just to show how I went about it and form that. So we go to the next slide, please. So again, it's like how I coded my data, the extraction of relevant lists. Again, it's just highlighting my exclusion lists and my inclusion lists, because I wanted to really focus on high school, early years, to see this is the area of cohort I was really interested in to find and look at the gaps. Next slide, please. So these are the results. So obviously looking at keywords that I found in I think it was over 70 research papers that I examined. These are some of the key terms that kept coming, and it was higher, but I gave a sample there of, I think it was 15. Out of that, safety of people who are trans and gender non-conforming students in high schools was one of the things, and bullying was another that they face. So it's physical harm, or the threat of physical harm, was one of the key factors that these young people had to live with every day, or to have in the back of their mind, am I going to be bullied today? And oh, thank you, Josephine. That is so true, because what we're finding is that it's not the children sometimes in the school who are the problem, it's the parents who have a problem with it. The fear of that this child might come into a some sort of relationship or friendship with that particular young person who's trans or gender conforming, and it's like, no, we don't want that in the family. We don't want that. Yeah, we don't want our child who's cisgendered to somehow turn into that. And that really is the language that's being used. Again, school policies, because they've come up with it. A lot of kids have said, well, I feel like I want to put a dress on because I get so anxious, and the school says no, because there's a strict policy on that. I'm running out of time, so oh my God, yeah, but this is the sort of stuff that I'm finding. So next slide, please, Sally. So again, it was like, okay, what have I found? And again, I just wanted to quickly iterate that limited or hardly any private schools, and that is an interesting thing. Why is it that principals fear in private schools participating in their in people like myself's research? What do they try, and how come they're not reaching out? And this is something on my journey I started last year on Linked, which I've tried to commit. And at the moment, I've got close to 4,000 people. So please come and join me if you want to. And one of the political reasons I wanted to do that was I wanted to get as many principals as I could around Australia to join up, so I could slowly start highlighting the visibility of trans and gender non-conforming students, so that they can see that, look, one, it's an important issue. B, if you have teachers like myself in schools, or allies who are willing to look at curriculum and kind of reframe things so everyone feels inclusive, you're going to increase your rates of performance and academic achievement. You're going to reduce absenteeism. You're going to reduce students from harm and self-suicide, because acceptance in the classroom space between the ages of 6 and 17 is important, because it's their world that they're interacting. So that's one of the things that, that has touched my heart. Bullying, again, happens a lot, and boys experience more physical assault than girls still. So boys like who are trans, who feel that they're female, are more likely to be verbally bullied. And this bullying now has switched to the platform of media. So Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, and it's then spread around. And I don't have time at the moment, but that is a lot of research happening in this space, where this is how bullying has sort of infiltrated the lands of technology, and it becomes hidden because it's seen like, well, it's not physical, it's not in the school, and schools are kind of like, well, how do we handle it? Has to be the parents, has to be that. And it's a very complex issue that we really need to address. I'll just quickly put the next slide. Yeah, again, so obviously the TGD, which is the abbreviator for transgender and gender non-conforming students, again, a lot of them found it difficult to talk with their teacher because their teacher was cisgendered, heterosexual, about transitioning, bullying, and they didn't feel that the person would listen to. And then when they did talk to them, they would be either referred quickly to the welfare worker, and then it's like, well, that sort of fobbing off, as I would call it, shows that another person who can't deal with it pass it on to someone else without understanding and welcoming that diversity into the classroom. Again, linked to the research question, 3 themes that I focused on: safety, relationships, and then I put the 2 together: school policies and bullying, where they are over within the context of well-being, is still the issue that really we need to address, because one suicide is too much, one self-harming action is too much. This is where we need to go. Again, one of the tools that has been positive is social media for support and affirmation. Young people are good at connecting through virtual communities, and I'm so happy, and bless the world and God about this, is that social media now allows students, from a young age, up to 18 and beyond, connect with other students and other young people who feel the same, and have a sense of community and friendship based on their identities, which are similar. And through that, it builds a kind of camaraderie and also builds strength. And that's why Minus 18 has been wonderful in the support for young people, and allowing things like school proms to take place in a safe, supported space and meet others alike. Again, okay, so linked again. If we could the next slide, please, Sally. Yeah. Again, I then went into detail about the implications using that 3-tiered model, which I won't have time now, but that would, if you wanted to, I'm happy to show my slides, to email my slides to anyone who's interested. Next slide. Okay, so for me, after all of this, it came up with, okay, what do I do? What's happening? And one of the core questions that came up with is how, oh, sorry, Sally, if you're going to have the last, back to that one, is how do we do gender differently in the 21st classroom setting? How do we move away from binary fixed notions of male and female? This is what the question that there is no quick answer. There is no quick solution, but it's something that's out there, and we as educators, we as researchers need to look at and provide ways of working through that so that the next teaching community that's coming up through pre-service teachers can really start being more critical when we're looking at curriculum documents, looking at policies to make sure we are affirming all our community in our classrooms so everyone feels safe, everyone feels validated. My thing that I really want to push for in my research is open up the sex and health education curriculum. I want to see a more deeper exploration of trans health and gender non-conforming health, and understanding of what happens to one's body if they're taking estrogen, if they're taking blockers, and normalize these sorts of issues so it doesn't become a taboo or a subject that's with misguided things. So this is one of the reasons, gaps. And again, my further research, my longitudinal study, we need more of those. And it's for me, and my focus is the first 3 years of high school. Look, I'm sorry, I'm just new at research. Maybe I'm doing things wrong. Look, if there's any questions, please, yeah, shout them out. Tell me, yeah. Hope it's okay.
Well done, Rick.
Lovely. Does anyone want to ask me anything or have an idea or suggestions? Happy to hear it. Hi, Lizzie.
Hi. I actually was interested in what you've said about, like, you're focusing in state schools and your experiences with private schools. And I'm kind of interested in that because that's almost like I'm in South Australia, so our education department's a bit different. And I work in early years, so I'm working with very, very young children at the start of primary school. But I've had a very different experience where the education department was just like, absolutely no, you're not allowed in our schools. And I had to go private to find people that were willing to let me in. So I'm interested more in what your experience has been.
For me, it's been closed doors with private. And it's, you know, and part of it, and even though I've taught in the schools, I've come into the schools, the principal says, no, sorry, we're not interested. Flat no. No, we don't have a need for it. If someone, and it's that standard line I got was, if a student who presents themselves, notice the word presents themselves, we will take the steps to support them through an individual learning plan. So that was, it was given to me. No, we don't want your research. No, we don't want your lived experience or to come class settings. Whereas in Victoria Department of Education, is willing, they want the research, you know, but the difficulty I face, and I guess you might face, is that because the first couple of years, parents, you know, to get parents' consent is really complicated. It's not an easy thing. I of course, in my process, I make sure everyone, their information becomes coded so no one knows who they are and what school they're from, in order to give that anonymity to that process. But it is difficult, I find, because one, young people are still exploring it, and it is difficult because by doing research, sometimes people think it's fixed. You know, wow, at this you're going to be. They don't know. Some people don't know who they are. Like myself, I knew I was different. I knew I was born different, but I did not come out until I was 50 of being trans. So, and I understand that for young kids, it's not easy. There's more identities in the community that help them, but it is difficult to get the support. I found that primary schools and early schools are much more advanced. They're much more supportive of young people. Teachers are more willing to let the kids explore identity through games, through play, through drama. But it's the early years of high school that, to me, really is the issue, when these kids come into a school very heteronormative, very binary in sports, in language, that to try to break through that is complex. So thank you, Lizzie. Yes, and please connect, because I'd love to connect with you and explore this further and what we can do on a Australia-wide thing to reduce the suicide rates and the self-harm rates. Anyone else want to throw something at me, or happy to I'm so happy that everyone's here. It's wonderful to have everyone listening, because it's been a difficult journey for myself, just quickly. And as I said, I wouldn't be here right now with TASA had it not been that, being excluded from schools. And I thought at first it was because I was a bit bigger. I did not think, my God, it's because I'm trans, and and then it's when schools were saying, and I was wondering why they would be saying to me, oh, we don't feel your safety would be, we could support that. And I was thinking, oh, maybe because they think I'm older. I didn't click. They never used the word, some of the schools, trans. So it's interesting that, and this is why I'm so happy to speak to everyone here. We need more visibility of teachers like myself who can come out and say, yes, I'm trans. Yes, I love teaching. Yes, I'm a practitioner. Give me an opportunity to teach in your school. Let me be able to guide your students about diversity and show that as someone who doesn't identify with the gender they were born with, can still be a good teacher, a role model to show other students. And the other thing is, I hadn't had a chance to mention, but I don't have the time, is I need to build allyship. I need to bring everyone together in this space, because if we can get allyship built at an early age from primary, imagine in high school, we're going to be able to address some of these issues more. I want kids to be able to say in a classroom to the teacher, hang on, why am I reading this book in English? Why can't we read someone about a young person's gender identity exploration? How many books do we have on the curriculum at the moment that allow young people to look at lived live experiences, or scholars who are trans and gender non-conforming as, if you want to say, heroes? We still want our heroes in schools to be cisgendered, heterosexual, binary characters. There's a lot of teachers who do not feel comfortable in changing that gap. So, yeah.
Now, Rick, we have a question for you, or
Yes.
a comment. Martin Forsey just needs to take he's on mute at the moment.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah, hi there, Ricky.
Hi.
How you going? Thanks for that, and all of the braveness that's around such research. I mean, it can't be easy stepping into this sort of space.
No.
As researcher, and all the kind of knockbacks that you talk about there. And I'm kind of intrigued by a couple of things. So I'm working with a student who's doing some research on neurodiversity, so dyslexia. Yes. Now, we've actually probably found that primary schools are less receptive to dealing with those forms of diversity than the secondary schools are. That's probably something
interesting.
That comes through in the work. Now, of course, we're talking about some very different visual thing, and of course, a whole lot of moral codes that people carry, and all sorts of things like that. So I think it's interesting. So a question I've got around that is, what do you think is happening? Why are, so you've got primary schools, as you suggest, more open to diversity, and I'm kind of wondering about what that looks like in practice. And then what's going on when we get then to that age? I mean, we're dealing with puberty, and we're dealing with, sexual identity formation, it probably in a more concrete form. Anyway, I'm just wondering what you think there, and I no doubt you've done a lot more reading around it than I have. So I'm interested in explanations to that. What's the sociology of what's going on?
Sure.
In this,
for me,
setting?
I can. One of the things that has changed the narrative around in primary schools has been the inclusion or the resurgence of play, the resurgence of exploring fictional characters, which has been brought to the classroom, you know, through digital platforms. It has allowed students to kind of develop a mindset around the world, the make-believe world, as something that can come into real life. So we've had a lot of insurgence with the media and people looking a bit different, coming to schools through music, through the media, different characters, and some teachers embracing that and allowing their students to dress up and being able to talk about what is boy, what is girl. And a lot of kids have been embracing that because they've grown up realizing that diversity is inclusive. The other thing quickly, Martin, I found is that if you look at young people, you would notice that they've grown up with the internet from day one. So the information that they are able to abstract from these sources has been more so than previous generations. So they have access to all sorts of things. So when something comes up in the classroom or something is mentioned by another student, a lot of them, they have iPhones now, they look it up, oh, that's what that means. Oh, they explore it deeper and they go clicking on and find out and become more aware of it. And to them, it's not seen as a threat. And when they go back to their home environment, parents at the early age think, oh, they're playing now. Oh, that's okay. They'll grow out of it. You know, it's really, they'll grow out of it. I'll put it like that. Whereas something like dyslexia is still seen as a problem, as a disability. It's seen as something that is tangible in terms of, oh, they can't do that, you know, whereas behavior in terms of expression is allowed because it's seen as a creativity thing for young people. In terms of early years, again, with the reading, why I focus on the first 3 years as an issue is only because, like you mentioned, the concrete, looking for identity points where young people are trying to fit in, you know, because they're wanting to belong. That sense of belonging is much greater in the first couple years than it becomes later, because in the young, there's a body that's developing. It's trying to look for models like themselves, and luckily they do have the digital platforms to help them. But because of the classroom setting, because the way curriculum is designed, it sort of reinforces, you know, cisgendered lives, you know, through English curriculum, through health education curriculum, through geographies. It reinforces that, so you're still seen as the other. I don't know, Martin, maybe I probably don't have the time probably to answer your question the way, but in terms of, look, that's why I'm right big into media. I do think media has shaped a lot of young people's experiences, understanding of the world, because they're able to research it in real time, in deeper understanding, to flick through and connect with others in real time to hear their story. That's one of the areas that I would say to everyone here, is to watch the TikTok space. I see TikTok as emerging and developing into more of an informative platform that we'll see in the next 6 to 12 months, where young people will start to use it as more like they did Facebook and YouTube a couple of years ago. It became a kind of realization that we're finding a lot of young people, 12, 13, 14, are using TikTok, who are depressed, who are suicidal, are using it as a way of getting back at the world and present themselves. So yeah, that's one. Do anyone else want to ask me anything before we finish up? I just wanted to thank everyone for coming and listening. That's all I can ask. And, you know, please keep in touch. My email, my phone number. I'm willing to have personal chats with anyone. If you have an issue with a young person or you're interested in doing research in this field, I'm more than happy to provide you with my information, share my information, to give you ideas. And also, please, if you have an opportunity, you know, a conversation, you know, say that, you know, it would be great if we had, you know, gender diverse teachers in classrooms and TAFE, you know, because it's through that visibility that we can address a lot of the issues around exclusion at the moment. And, you know, all I can speak to say is, you know, I hope before I die, that things will change, that one day every diversity is respect, becomes the norm, you know, and, you know, we don't have it. Any young person growing up can be who they want to be a character, you know, use pronouns and, you know, thank you, Martin, for that. Yep. You know, and the other thing, Martin, I was going to say too, is for me, it's been, one of the reasons that I wanted to, secondary was, it was difficult for me to get permission from parents, and it was schools felt it was too complex. So I had to pick, and that's why it's even harder for me to get access to young people. And it's a lot of negotiation I've had to do. And luckily with my work as a social worker for many years, I have a few contacts in Headspace, and that's, I'm using their sorts of groups to be able to really get information. And again, I'd say teaching, if you know any teachers, again, just alert them to the fact that, you know, if you want to help, you want to make a change, think about that. And I have an allyship Zoom tomorrow if anyone's interested. That's between 3 and 4. That we've got 3 presenters, myself, a counsellor and a writer, and we're just going to be talking to people how to be a good ally, what it means. And we've also got trans people. We're breaking into groups to learn about language, learn about how we can support each other in workspaces and schools, so that we understand each other's differences and respect each other's use, you know, language and presentation. So as I said, please keep in touch. I'm on LinkedIn, on Facebook. I'm out there in the community. I do a lot of advocacy work. I'm trying to, at the moment, in Maribyrnong Council, I've set up a big community group to change the council. So I want to create safe spaces for young people. And my dream is to have every council in Australia have a rainbow chair, that young people, especially young people who are, you know, LGBTIQ, can come in the council, sit down, and even their friends can come and sit down, and it'd be symbolic that, you know, come and sit on live my life for a few minutes, and the council accepting diversity. It's a little visual thing, but I'm hoping it will change. You know, I don't want to see no one go through what I went through at school. I want everyone, no one to be hit, no one to be spat on, no one to be laughed at. And my hope is by giving local governance to start with that, and maybe one day schools might have a chair, and it could be painted rainbow, or any other kind of symbolic to say we love diversity in our school. Come and sit in our chair and be part of our team. So I'm hoping with symbolic ways too, of using art and sculpture, that maybe we can change perceptions. So that's me, Sally. That's I can talk for hours, you know. I love this area, and please, anyone's interested, I'd love you to join even my working group. We have a few doctors, we have a few researchers. What we're developing is a think tank, and we're hoping to develop it, goes beyond this project of Maribyrnong. We're hoping to then use it to develop resources to change different settings, schools and government departments, where we can produce material to really reinforce how you can implement diversity within your spaces, and it just makes the community grow. And, you know, I don't know. I'm happy. I'm alive. I'm happy. Thank you so much for coming today. I'm sorry if I babble on.
No, Rick, it's been great. It's a great presentation. We do have someone with their hand up, Lizzie.
Oh, sorry, darling. I didn't hear. Sophie.
Oh, and Sophie.
Oh, Lizzie. Oh, wow. People like
No, I'm just clapping.
Oh, thank you, darling.
Oh, okay, pardon me.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Sophie, darling, too. Thank you, Marie. Thank you, Martin, Jamie, Mia, Jennifer.